How's it going, ladies and gentlemen? My name is RuffledRowlit, and welcome back to a brand new video. Today, ladies and gents, we've got ourselves loads of stuff to talk about. Of course, there's been just a little bit of talks about Nintendo Switch 2. There is some DLC-related stuff we're going to talk about, and also, we got some things about possibly the future of Pokemon games that we want to talk about as well. So sit back, relax, and let's get started with the first thing on the screen right here, which is going to be this post over on 4chan, showing this one image. Specifically, you guys can see on the screen right here. Now, this image is getting a lot of people up and riled up and crazy, thinking about like, "Ooh, is this the new Pokemon game, guys?" No, it's not, but it is actually related to what we might or should expect going into the future. So, the person that posted this said, "The graphics are way better than Scarlet and Violet. WTF is this?" And then you can see the image here. It's basically just, honestly, it looks great. It looks like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, kind of, with a different sort of character in the middle here. But then around here, you can see there's way more foliage. There's way more, like, the trees look way more varied. Because if you think about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, if you really think about any Pokemon game in the last, I don't want to say, I don't know, maybe the last 20 or so years, any of them that have been in 3D have usually been very rigid and I guess, like, very standard. I don't really know what word to use here without sounding too harsh, but basically there isn't a lot of variety in the actual environment in Pokemon games. It tends to be very the same, so the world doesn't really look real and it sometimes feels a bit off. But here, it looks like Game Freak was trying to actually make, or at least do a mock-up, because that's what this is, right? So you might be wondering, what actually is this image? Well, this is an image mock-up from specifically Game Freak that they posted at CEDEC, which basically like is a sort of conference when it comes to developers and stuff like that. They do a conference every year where people like, companies and stuff will come around and they'll show off like improvements they've made and changes they've made. And this specific image is from Game Freak's presentation where they were showing a mock-up specifically of what their plans were for Scarlet and Violet, where they were testing things out, seeing how they can change like the lighting, change the actual fidelity on textures, using different like, filters and stuff like that. And basically right here you can see the actual post over on mynintendonews.com, which says, Pokemon Scarlet Violet developers Game Freak showed attendees at the CEDEC awards panel in Japan some of the concept art and in-game visuals they were trying to implement in the two most recent Pokemon games. The Japanese company was attempting to implement an ID which the company dubs real and deformed. This means that the game's background environment would take on a more realistic approach, while the actual Pokemon and various NPCs would have a more stylized look. You can check out the art in the in-game visuals down below. And basically here is the actual full like article itself of what they were doing, so we can like look actually at what they're saying here. So the first one is just a mock-up image. The second one here is them actually showing, I guess, Scarlet and Violet's actual world once they actually made it. And what they mean in a weird, it's just really weird. Them saying real and deformed was a bit odd, because if you actually think about it, what they did with Scarlet and Violet was the characters did become better, I would say. I think Scarlet and Violet's characters did start looking more realistic, and they actually were an improvement to previous games. But they also did that with the Pokemon, where they made the Pokemon look more realistic. Like, take, for example, I don't know, really any of the Pokemon, maybe Magnemite or something, which looks like, actually looking at his texture, looks more realistic, which then goes against what they said about making the world look more realistic and the characters the other way around. I feel like they actually swapped that. I think that was a literal swap, because the world, to me, in Scarlet and Violet, looks way more like this idea of being stylized, which it even isn't if you think about it. It's very standard. But that's what actually looks more like, like, I guess, stylized to me versus the actual characters and the NPCs and stuff, which in my eyes looked more realistic in this case than any Pokemon game in the past. But basically, what I want to bring up with this is that if you actually look at the original post here that was over on GameWatchImpress.co.Japan, basically it's just a website that kind of lists the whole interview they had or the whole presentation. But it basically went through all of this where they explained all of it. And I can't read Japanese, so it would be too hard for me to go through it. But they were just going through some of the stuff about like the different like maps they use. Like when I say maps, I mean like the UV maps and stuff like that for texturing. And for example, here you can see like metallic, base color, roughness. Basically, like, this is all about the different ways they made the textures work and the actual like colors in the world. And all I'm gonna say about that is that I do think Scarlet and Violet looks relatively better in terms of the Pokemon textures. Like the stuff you see, the textures you see on some of the Pokemon do look way better, okay, than we have had in any really previous Pokemon game ever. But there are still issues with these games. They still look subpar, like compared to something like I don't know, Tears of the Kingdom, right? Like if you actually look it up, Tears of the Kingdom, versus Scarlet and Violet, like, you can kind of see, you know, which one might look better. I think a lot of people generally, you know, tend to agree on the side of Tears of the Kingdom, or really any Zelda game does look better. But, you know, it's kind of hard to determine on that. I guess it's a little bit based on what you prefer. But for the most part, I think a lot of people do prefer Tears of the Kingdom more and think that it looks better. Not that I think Scarlet and Violet looks awful. I think it's still solid. But I do know a lot of people want to go back to a different art, like, you know, to kind of like even something like Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. A lot of people want to go back to that art style, which I have nothing against it. But I don't see Scarlet and Violet being a horrible, you know, direction. I feel like they've improved a lot over the last few years compared to what we used to have. Because I'm gonna be real, please go back and look at X and Y. Please go back and, I mean, X and Y pulled off really well considering what it was and that it was on the 3DS. But please go back to some of the older games and you will realize that it used to look way worse. I mean, have you seen Sword and Shield? I don't know, Chief. But either way, so this was what this was about, in case you guys were not sure. But I do think what this tells us, this actual image, this you know, concept art, is that Game Freak could definitely go in this direction and make something that looks like this. Even the fact that they've considered it is pretty interesting. So I think this image is a good representation of what we should maybe expect going into not this year, but next year. Because remember, 2024, this year, it's not going to be a new generation this year. This year is going to probably be a remake year. We're going to have, you know, remake games like Johto, maybe a Unova game. I don't think we're going to get a Unova remake. I'm going to be real with you. I don't expect it. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's realistic to expect it, but some people, of course, going to be out there, you know, assuming it's going to happen. But I just want to say that, you know, I don't expect that to be the case. However, what I do expect to see is some form of a basic game this year. Just something standard, more easy, maybe not even made by Game Freak, maybe by a side studio like Ilko or something like that. Just something small is what I'm expecting for 2024. But next year is when the 3-year cycle of Generation 9 is going to be over, which means it's time for Generation 10. It's time for the next generation. And I think for that generation, for Generation 10, whatever it's going to be, whether it's going to be Pokemon, I don't even know what, like, naming to give it, Pokemon Ascend, something else, I don't know. I'm not really going to give the full naming of that one. But basically, whatever the next Pokemon game is, the next generation, it's going to hopefully look something more like this. And I do think that the next generation should be landing, hopefully, most likely, I would assume, on the next console. And the reason I say this is because Pokemon-like games, they tend to run about 2 generations per console. And also, speaking of the Nintendo Switch 2 and the next console, it's something we're going to talk about again in this video, because there has been more and more rumors. There's just more and more stuff cropping up about different companies talking about, like, the Nintendo Switch 2, companies that aren't Nintendo themselves, but still interesting that they're talking about it. And I thought it would be interesting to bring that up. But basically what I'm saying is, whatever the next generation is, it's probably going to be on a new console. And maybe that new console should have a, you know, just a general boost in terms of performance, allowing for a game like this to exist on there. Like, that is what I'm at least hoping for. That's what I'm assuming. I mean, hey, it is what it is. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm right. We'll have to wait and see what actually happens with that. But I'm hoping, I'm very much, you know, hopeful and confident that that's going to be the case. So we've done that. Let's move on to the actual next thing, because there's a lot of things to talk about, but I think one of the things I want to bring up a lot here is actually the Nintendo Switch 2, because there is a post here from Go Nintendo Tweet, who basically posted that rumors, former accessory manufacturer Game Shark, interesting that they would be coming out of the woodworks, claims that Switch's successor will launch on September of 2024. If we look right here, you can see manufacturer Game Shark claims that Switch's successor will launch a September 2024 update. They actually did say here, though, there was an update to this with new info. So, you know, take this with a massive grain of salt, okay? But basically what it said is older gamers might remember Game Shark as the company that put out all sorts of cheat devices for consoles and portables. While Game Shark has been out of the business for quite some time, they are apparently making an AI-related return, as they claim to have some sort of inside information on Nintendo's future as well. Game Shark is set to be renamed as AI Shark. Oh, please, God, no. Which will be using its revolutionary AI-enhanced technology to offer gamers personalized hints and tips as they play games. In other words, AI Shark will watch what you play and how you play it in order to determine where you might need some help. So basically, it's just going to be a new way for us to cheat in games. At least that's what they're claiming here. But, I mean, we'll have to wait and see if that's actually going to be true, because I really don't know if that's going to be the case. If we go down here, what they say is, in other words, AI Shark will watch you play and how you play in order to determine where you might need some help. In an official press release, though, for AI Shark, the company mentions that they plan to launch their service alongside the Nintendo Switch 2 in September 2024. How or why AI Shark would become privy to this information is beyond everyone. It's obviously incredibly hard to believe that somehow AI Shark is in the know when it comes to what Nintendo is doing with the Switch successor. Furthermore, it would be insane to think that AI Shark would share this information with the public. While this story is certainly an interesting one, and AI Shark will no doubt be answering some questions going forward, right now we'd take some of this information with a grain of salt. So yes, again, if you're going to be coming through with a new device of sorts, I don't know if announcing it like this is, I mean, I guess maybe getting press on it this way is a smart thing to do, but it's a bit weird, isn't it? I don't know. But again, this is just one thing. There's been a lot of people, and I'm going to be real. It's been a lot of posts. Like, this is not the only thing that's been cropping up in recent time. There's just one of many different, like, you know, posts that have been made about a Switch 2. And I think the biggest one was from a bunch of developers in Japan, like Capcom, for example. You had devs over at Capcom talking about, like, being excited for Nintendo's next, like, hardware. Like, it's weird that they're all talking about it because at the end of the day, remember, the Switch came out in 2017. It has been a long 7 years since then. We're now in 2024, right? 7 years since the release of these games. Like, it's actually going to be turning 7 in March, because that's when it released in 2017, March of 2017. I think on the 28th or 24th, something like that. I could be wrong about the date here, but I just remember it released in 2017 in March, which means it's been a long time since this console came out. It's about time to move on to the next thing, right? It's about time to get a bit of a hardware bump. Which is crazy because last year, 2023, was actually, like, interestingly for the Switch, was the year that it received the most, like, amount of games out of any other console. Like, every console last year actually received less games, not counting PC because PC is a totally different beast, but it was the console that got the most amount of new game releases. Which is pretty crazy, if you think about it. It's pretty nuts, especially towards the end of this, you know, console's, like, lifespan. It's actually reaching, it like, it's a natural conclusion, but guess what? It happened. We got a ton of new stuff for it, and that kind of leaves me wondering, would they want to be move on just yet? But it also would make sense, because think about it. They've already released 2 big Zelda games. They've released 2 generations of Pokemon. They've done one big Mario, actually multiple Mario games, but one big one with Odyssey, and then also they did the one from last year. I always forget the name of it. But basically, they've done a lot of different, you know, big titles already. I think it is about time they move on to the next thing. Like, they've done the big ones. But then the question becomes, what would be a launch title? Like, what would be an actual thing to launch the console with? Because remember, the thing that killed the console, like the Wii U, was the lack of games, right? Like, that was the big thing that killed it. So the best way they can go about releasing this new console would be to, like, I guess, do it the same way they did with, like, maybe like back in the day, like the DS and stuff, because basically what they did with every handheld console, because what they did with the DS and even the 3DS is that they always allowed the first iteration of that upgrade to have some form of compatibility with the previous console. So for example, if you had the original DS, like the first one that came out, you would be able to play your Game Boy games on it. But that changed with like revisions of the console, right? Because the first DS, the original Nintendo DS, that one had compatibility with, you know, Game Boy games. But then they changed it with the DSi and so on and so forth. Like, they actually made different iterations of the DS, and then they removed that feature by making, like, you know, quote-unquote cheaper versions or, you know, alternatives. And that's the same thing I think is going to happen, you know, here. It's that we're going to get a new Switch console, a Switch 2 or a Pro Switch or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't really matter. You know, a new Nintendo Switch or Super Nintendo Switch, because I guess that would be pretty funny. But basically, whatever the next console is, what's going to happen is that they're going to remove, they're going to leave in the, you know, compatibility with previous games, aka the original Nintendo Switch. They're going to leave that compatibility for the first iteration and then remove it for the second iteration of the new Switch. So if we call it the Super Nintendo Switch, the first version of it will have compatibility with old Nintendo Switch games. Because what happens then is, like, the first thing that happens when you have that situation is, oh shit, me, Mr. Jim Bob over here, or Timmy over there, we don't have to buy a bunch of new games to, you know, be able to enjoy this new console. Right? We can actually just, you know, play our regular stuff on it. Like, I can go and play my, you know, Scarlet and Violet on it. I can play whatever. But here's the thing. The moment the next version of it comes out, which usually takes about a year or so, 6 months, a year, before an iteration comes out. But once the iteration of it comes out, they will remove that feature. And then it will be only Super Nintendo Switch games that will be allowed on the actual console. It's basically just a way to, I guess, give a bump in terms of, like, sales and stuff, but also, like, increase the compatibility with the console, because that's the thing that the Switch lacks, and why I personally, if it wasn't for me making content, and if it wasn't for the fact that Pokemon comes out on the Nintendo Switch and only on Switch, only on Nintendo consoles, I would not be buying a Switch. I'd be buying a freaking Steam Deck. The Steam Deck is way better. It's got way better performance. I can play whatever the hell I want on it, and it is a emulating machine, okay? Like, I would take the Steam Deck any day over the Nintendo Switch. Like, it's not even a question. I would take it any day over the Nintendo Switch, because the Nintendo Switch has dog shit performance compared to it, in at least my opinion. But again, I'm just going to end it there, because there's not really much else I can say in regards to, like, the Switch itself. There's only really so much you can say about it. But Nintendo Switch 2, let's see what happens. Let's see what the future holds in terms of it, and what we might get. But that's not all, though. We still have a lot of stuff to talk about. So I want to move on to the next thing, which is going to be the fact that there is going to be a new set, a new TCG set coming out. It's going to be Temporal Forces. It's going to be releasing on March 22nd, so it's a few more months until this comes out. And I think right now, for those who are, of course, in the know, there's going to be a new set coming out literally in a few days, now in January, which is, of course, going to be the new, like, shiny set in the TCG. So that's going to be coming out, of course, with a bunch of paradoxes and stuff like that. So that's going to be interesting. But for the most part, though, Temporal Forces is going to be the next set, at least the English set. So let's move on to the next thing. So it's actually an interesting post coming to us from Centro, who says, in case you guys haven't noticed, Pokemon is moving towards a more frequent cadence of content releases, even if they're smaller, which keeps the franchise in people's minds longer, which is true. I've also noticed this. I mean, this has actually been relevant, I want to say, since, for years now, but it's been more relevant since about, like, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee came out. It's become a thing. And I think you can even say it was from Sun and Moon already. But basically, what he's talking about here is that if you look at the actual schedule of Pokemon releases, November 2019 had Sword and Shield. Then June of 2020, which is, the next year, had the Isle of Armor, which is actually relatively close if you think about it, because from November to June, that's not really that many months, right? You got, like, what, basically 7 months or so, give or take distance between them, right? Moving on to October, which is, from June to October, barely a few months there for the Crown Tundra. So that's 2 releases in that time, in the span of, like, 5 months or so. Then you had, of course, November 2021, you had BDSP. So that was, give or take, a year later. But remember, it may have been a year later, but you also had 2 games releasing back-to-back there. So you had BDSP, November 2021, and then January you had PLA. So that's like a month and a half, basically, distance between 2 full game releases. We're not even talking DLC here. We're talking game releases. And then he also includes here PLA Daybreak, which is an update for PLA, which came out in February 2022. Then you had BDSP with the actual updates for BDSP as well in March. Then you had Scarlet and Violet, and what you have with Scarlet and Violet as well, you have to keep in mind, he also does it, he mentions it here that he didn't even include that, but there are also events in Scarlet and Violet that happen, like the Mew versus Mewtwo event, and a lot of, like, raids and stuff like that. But what he says here is, like, November 2022, you had Scarlet and Violet, but in that same year, you had, of course, also PLA, the PLA update, and the BDSP update, and then, of course, Scarlet and Violet. Then in 2023, so a year later, in September, almost about a year later, but, it's close. You had Scarlet and Violet's The Teal Mask. Then December, you had Scarlet and Violet, the Indigo Disc. And then January, you had Scarlet and Violet, Mochi Mayhem. So basically, and he also says here, it doesn't even include things like Zeraora event for Sword and Shield or the Mew versus Mewtwo event for Scarlet and Violet. Pokemon is trying to become more like a GAS, which is a games as a service, which is with its own unique twist, which is very true. So I've kind of been, like, mentioning this for a while now. This is something I've been saying since, I want to say, 2013. But, like, Pokemon has had this issue with their game releases that other games didn't have, which was, once people finished a Pokemon game, they were done with Pokemon, right? Like, people just would finish the story, and unless you were into unless you were into VGC or, like, competitive battling or shiny hunting, you would not play the games more. Like, you would be done with it. Like, you would just end it there. Most people would just complete their Pokedex, if even that. But they would complete the story. That's, like, the bare minimum everybody would at least do. Would complete the story, and then they would just do some of the extra stuff, like, maybe complete the Pokedex. But other than that, their actual interaction with Pokemon would stop after that, which also means they would stop interacting with all of Pokemon. What do I mean by this? Because Pokemon does not really make money, and I've said this for bloody years now. Pokemon doesn't make money from the video games. The video games are a market, they're a loss leader. Basically, they're a loss leader. And I'm going to look up the term as a good explanation for you guys. But a loss leader is basically a term used in business for something that basically drives sales to something else. It's there to lose money, but it makes everything else profitable. So basically a loss leader, also a leader, is a pricing strategy where a product is sold at a price below its market cost to stimulate other sales of more profitable goods or services. Basically, Pokemon games cost a lot of money to make, or at least I think they do, but they cost money to make. They aren't always mega profitable. They are still profitable, okay? But they are not like the main profit like maker for Pokemon. Rather, they bring sales to other things. Because I'm going to tell you right now, they make way more money off of you as a consumer, as a player. They make way more money off of you by you buying the TCG, the cards, the freaking, the toys, the merch, etc. For the love of God, look at how many plushies I have here. I'm holding a Smolin. This thing is like $40, okay? $40. Think about that. That's like, right now, half the cost of one of those Pokemon games, right? And guess what? I have 2 of them! There's 2! I have a giant Rowlet! These 2 things are the cost of, like, 1 Pokemon game. Or sometimes, maybe even more, because I don't remember how much I paid for these. I didn't think about it, because I thought, ooh, they're Pokemon, they're cute, I love Pokemon. My point is basically this. I'm going to throw them on the ground, because fuck them. Basically, I'm going to say this. In terms of, like, money made, Pokemon games don't matter. They are just a giant advertising board, okay? They're just a giant commercial. That's what the Pokemon games are. They're just there to advertise to you and basically get you interested in Pokemon more and more and keep your interest relevant beyond just like, a short span of time. That's why we have so many more updates. That's why they are doing all these things. Why do you guys think? You might be wondering to yourself, they only added raids into Pokemon, like raids into the Pokemon main game since Sword and Shield. They only added in raid battles because Pokemon Go did it. But why did Pokemon Go do it? Is to keep people staying in the game. It gives you a reason to come back, right? It's always about retention, keeping your time invested into these games longer and longer. That's the same thing that YouTube does. Why are YouTube Shorts so popular? It's because you easily get lost in them. Why is TikTok big? It's because you easily get lost in them. It's short, it grabs your attention, it keeps your attention for a long amount of time. Think about it. Most people spend 1 to 2 hours in a single session on one of those platforms because it gets you hooked and it keeps you watching it and keeps you staying in there. That's the same thing Pokemon's trying to do with these releases. By doing all these different events, these raids, these, mystery gift giveaways, these special 7-star raids, it's a way to keep you playing. And the same way that those raids and stuff work is the exact same way that these releases work. By keeping you always in the loop of Pokemon and wanting more, and then them actually giving you more, that means you will stay more in tune with the franchise, meaning you're also more likely to buy stuff from Pokemon. Like, for example, if I wasn't playing Pokemon for videos right now, I wouldn't be paying attention to it. The same way, and I always use this example, I love Game of Thrones. I think it's a great series, but here's the thing with me and Game of Thrones. I only pay attention to it and spend money on that franchise when it's relevant on TV when it's relevant on HBO, right? When new episodes are coming out. Once the series ended back in, I don't even know, it's been like 5 years now. But when the series ended a while back, when we actually got the conclusion of Game of Thrones, what I did was I stopped consuming it because I was like, oh yeah, it's over now. I got no more episodes. My hype is gone. But then they released a new series, House of Dragon. And guess what I did? I got really into it. I bought all the books, okay? I would have spent money on the books. I don't read books, but I still bought them. And you know what else I did? I bought a giant mug. I think it's right here. Here it is. House of Dragon, Fire and Blood. There it is. Bloody hell. I spent money on a freaking mug just because I was so in tune with it, because I was so hyped for it, waiting for every episode, and I was hyped. And then the last episode happened. I watched a bunch of videos on YouTube. I was really in the mood for it. I loved it. But then the moment that the series ended, my hype lasted for about a week and a half, and then I lost interest. And then I forgot, not that I lost interest because I still want to see more of it, but there's nothing there for me to consume. There's no main product to keep advertising to me or to give me that like monkey brain feeling that I want to, come back for. Like there's none of that. So that's why I'm not spending more money on random, Game of Thrones mugs. My point is, that's the same thing with Pokemon. They got to keep giving you content. They got to keep giving you these advertisements, which is what Pokemon games are, and what these updates and DLCs are. Just a giant advertisement. They got to keep giving you that so you stay interested in the actual franchise to be willing to spend more money on it. That's pretty much the simple, the simple explanation of it. It's not really that deep, but, it's pretty straightforward. So, this is interesting because they also have a post here from Kuro who says that he has a feeling that the DLC for Scarlet and Violet may have actually gotten delayed in terms of when they were probably meant to be released. And he mentions here that it may have to do with some of the things that actually, you know, matches up with the actual stuff in Pokemon, you know, Scarlet and Violet's DLC. Like, for example, the Teal Mask, which was maybe supposed to be based on the Japanese Obon festivals, which are mid-July, so maybe that was when it was supposed to be released. The Indigo Disc, for example, Back to School, which would be early September in Japan in this case. Guess what? That didn't match up either, because that came out, what, December? And the Mochi Mayhem Halloween Special, which should have been maybe in October or something like that, but no, it didn't happen. So, yeah, I think it is, you know, very possible that they could have been delaying them. It is very possible. I actually like the idea of that this might be the possibility. You know, I think it is a possibility. Again, I don't know if that's true, but I think it is a possibility. Moving on to the next thing, though, we have a post right here from Sarah, who says, the final wave of the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the hidden treasure of Area Zero icon parts, is now live on Nintendo Switch Online's app. So if you have the Nintendo Switch Online app, you can actually get your hands on a bunch of these icons, which you can use on your console. I think these are all for now from like the Indigo Disc and whatnot, so you guys can go get your hands on them right now. They're available until, until the 19th. Damn, that's not really long. So yeah, go get your hands on them if you want to. That's one of the things. Moving on to the next thing, though, there's actually a really cool thing in the DLC where if you actually are dealing with Ogerpon, the Loyal 3, and Pekarunt, they all have different interactions with each other. So you guys can see right here, when you send out Ogerpon against it, and let's see if my camera doesn't block it, but what happens is it actually gets really pissed off. Like, Ogerpon loses its shit seeing, like, you know, Pekarunt. It just doesn't like it. If you send out Monkey Dory, same thing, like the Pekarunt has a reaction to it. It's really cool because I love this kind of stuff. I know this is such a small thing, but I love when Pokemon does these kind of things where like there's a reaction from the Pokemon whenever they actually, you know, see each other. Like, it's just small little details that make for a better experience at the end of the day. So that's at least what I think. But I just like it when they do small stuff like this to just make, I don't know, to make the game feel more alive, make it feel more real in a sense. You can see right here as well from Light says, when you encounter Nemona in the league room and talk with Lacey, she confirms this. Nemona has been in Unova, and also Lacey is Clay's daughter, so I guess it's confirmed here. Where basically says, oh, Nemona, it's been far too long. I don't think we met since that party, have we? She says, whoa, Lacey, right, good to see you. I can't believe you remembered my name from just that one time we met. That's awesome. Oh no, it's not more. It's no more impressive than you remembering my name in return. And besides, how could I forget you? You created such a stir, challenging my daddy to a battle right there in your fancy party dress. Oh boy, of course she did. Yeah, I'm really sorry about that. Once I heard the news he was a gym leader, I just couldn't help myself. So yeah, it's confirmed. But Daddy was so pleased with you. Do you know what he said? Nothing. Nothing wrong with a young missy who knows what she wants. Yeah, come on, man. He's a goddamn cowboy. But yeah, so basically that's kind of confirms it, which is a lot of characters that are related in this game, and there's a lot of relationships to Unova, which again doesn't make me think there's going to be a remake, because it does take me to this one post right here on 4chan where this guy said, looking at the latest DLC, it's pretty obvious that Black and White remakes are right around the corner. The question is, will they release for the Switch or the rumored Switch 2 coming in fall 2024? Here's the thing. I am still not expecting Black and White remakes. Like, as much as I'd like to see it, I don't think it's going to happen now yet. I still think it's going to be next generation, like 2026 or something, right? That's like in basically 2 years is when I'm expecting to see Black and White remakes. Not now. But I can't deny that there's a lot of hints to it. But it's funny because this guy down here makes a post where he's just kind of mocking the guy above. But what he says is actually true, though. He says, guys, there's going to be a Hoenn remake in Gen 5 because they made brand new sprites for all the Gen 3 Pokemon and brought back the move Dive. And then here, guys, there's going to be a Sinnoh remake in Gen 7 because they made a new model for Cynthia and the Looker. And the Ultra Wormholes are reference to the Sinnoh legendaries. And Bronzong and the Rotom-Dex is a huge part of the game. And Silvally references Arceus and Canalave Library. Basically, he's mocking because at the end of the day, you have to remember that Pokemon remakes do tend to follow a bit of a pattern, right? There's a specific pattern that they follow, which is every other generation has a mainline remake. And when I say mainline remake, I mean a remake of a mainline Pokemon game. So, a la Pokemon Fire Red Leaf Green, Hot Gold Soul Silver, ORAS, BDSP. Those four are actually mainline remakes. Everything else, like, I don't know, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, Legends Arceus, those are what I like to use the term for is experimental games. Those games have nothing to do with the regular remakes. Those are separate. Those are a separate entity. The same way that I think this year's games are going to be a Johto remake, that's an experimental remake and not like a regular mainline game one. So, what do I mean in terms of this? Well, what I'm trying to say is I agree with this guy. Sometimes when they make things too obvious, which is what they've exactly done here, they've made the Black and White references so in our face. The Unova references are so obvious They're literally black and white. They're really right there. They're very clear. There is no nuance. There's nothing like that there. You're very much in your face, which makes me think that we're not going to see the remakes this year. And I never thought we were going to see the remakes. I still expect there to be a black and white Paradox game. When I say Paradox, I'm talking about an experimental one. A game similar to Legends Arceus, but not really a Legends game. That's more or less what I'm expecting. Again, Johto is still number 1 on my list, but I do think the fact that they hinted so much is also like, either it's kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, it could be like, wow, there's so many hints, it's obvious it's going to be Unova, but also it could be like, oh wow, there's too many hints. Maybe this is just like a red herring, and then it's not actually going to be happening, and they're just, intentionally putting all these references to kind of mislead us in a sense, which they've done before. But I do think that this guy's point here is actually very important, because yes, people back during during Gen 5 thought that we're going to get Hoenn remakes because, yeah, they made brand new sprites for all the Gen 3 Pokemon and they brought back Dive. Of course, people were excited. Holy shit, we're going to go back to Hoenn. Let's go, dude. But no, that didn't happen. It happened the generation after. Same thing here. Guys, we're going to get Sinnoh remakes in Gen 7 because they made a lot of these references. They brought back Cynthia and Looker and stuff. People thought it was going to happen. Guess what? It didn't happen in Gen 7. Happened in Gen 8, the next generation. Same thing right now. Everybody's saying, we're going to get Unova this year. Unova remakes. Let's go. I keep thinking, no, it's not going to happen. We're going to have something different this year. And then next generation, which starts next year in 2025, we're going to get ourselves the new thing then. We're going to get the new remake of Black and White, in that generation, aka in 2026. So yeah, at least that's where I end up on that conversation. I don't really know what else to say about it. But yeah, I think that's where we can end that point. And I think the last thing I want to bring up is people were talking about, like, I saw some people saying that, like, they don't really want to have this person was talking about, like, the transition to open world. And I like the fact that we moved to open world, but I've seen a lot of people talking about, like, not liking the move to open world Pokemon. Personally, I think it's really bizarre. I think Pokemon works really well in open world. I like it in open world, and I think that's why remakes are so nice, because remakes can still, and these experimental games of sorts can serve really well as games that cover that love for more on the rails, more like specific and more determined Pokemon journeys. Like basically games like that, which are, again, on the rails, more, like streamlined, right? There's no exploration in the sense that you have, like, in Scarlet and Violet or in Breath of the Wild or like an open world game. I think those games still need to exist in some way or shape. And that's, I think, why remakes exist for a reason, right? That's why, like, games like Let's Go and stuff like that, should exist. And games like regular remakes, like BDSP and stuff, like, I think that's why those games need to exist still, to kind of give people still that feeling, an old feeling of Pokemon, because, again, nostalgia sells, okay? Nostalgia sells. It always does. So it's just good to keep that going, at least from a business perspective. But, yeah, I think that pretty much summarizes that. I also want to mention, really cool, though, that the Switch has actually sold now more units in Japan than the actual Nintendo DS, which is pretty crazy. So it's actually outsold it in Japan. Specifically Japan, I don't know about the world, though, but Japan, it has actually outsold it, which is pretty crazy, man. And finally, I want to show these really cool, like, concept arts for other versions of Ogerpon, or sorry, Pekka-Runt. So Cherry Runt, for example, like basically different versions and different berries that you could see like Pekka-Runt look like. Like instead of being like a Pekka-Runt, it would be a Perism Runt. So like, or like an Aura Berry, for example, like an Aura Runt. So yeah, just kind of a cool little thing I wanted to show. But yeah, that's pretty much it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you on the next one, and bye-bye.